Welcome to another episode of the Speak English podcast. I'm David, and with me today is Sarah. How's it going, Sarah?
Hi, David. I'm doing great and super excited for today's topic. We're going to talk about how to leave basic English behind and start sounding more fluent.
Exactly. So, if you've been using simple phrases like, "How are you?" or "What's your name?" in your conversations, today's episode is perfect for you. We're going to help you level up your English.
That's right. We'll be sharing some easy-to-use phrases, expressions, and tips that will make you sound more natural and confident. But before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss any of our future episodes.
Don't forget to hit the notification bell, and let's get started. Today, we're focusing on how to stop using basic phrases and start speaking like a pro. Ready, Sarah?
Ready? Let's jump into it.
When we first start learning English, we're all excited to use the language. We begin with the basics, and that's great because it's the foundation. But there comes a point when we realize that these basic phrases start feeling repetitive and, honestly, a bit boring. Think about it. How many times have you said, "How are you?" in a conversation? Or, "What's your name?" It gets to a point where you feel like you're stuck using the same sentences over and over again. And let's be real, these phrases don't really show your true skills in English, right?
Exactly, David. While those basic phrases are necessary to get the conversation started, they don't help us stand out. I mean, if you want to truly sound fluent and confident, you need more than just the simple greetings and introductions. Using the same basic sentences again and again can even make you feel like you're not progressing. It's like you're stuck at the beginner level, even though you've been studying for a while. And the worst part is that you may not even realize it's holding you back until you try to have a more natural conversation.
That's such a great point, Sarah. And the truth is, relying on those simple phrases all the time can actually limit your ability to express yourself. You can get stuck in this cycle of saying the same thing every time you meet someone new or start a conversation. And we've all been there, right? You feel like you're saying the right things, but you just don't sound as fluent as you'd like. You end up thinking, "Is this all I know? Is this all I can say?" And that's where the problem lies. You're not challenging yourself to expand your vocabulary or express more complex thoughts.
Exactly, David. It's about expanding your range of expressions, not just memorizing a few basic phrases. And the good news is that it's entirely possible to move beyond that level. You can start incorporating new words and phrases into your daily conversations that make you sound more confident and natural. The key is to stop settling for basic phrases and to begin experimenting with different ways to express yourself. Don't be afraid to try something new, even if it feels a little challenging at first. The more you practice, the easier it gets, and the more fluent you will sound.
So now that we've established the problem of relying too much on basic phrases, let's talk about how to break free from that and really level up your English. The key to doing this is expanding your vocabulary. It's one of the most effective ways to sound more natural and fluent. Sarah, how do you recommend people go about expanding their vocabulary?
Great question, David. Expanding your vocabulary is actually easier than it sounds. The first step is to start exposing yourself to new words regularly through reading, listening, and practicing. But it's not just about memorizing random words. It's about learning words in context so you can use them naturally in conversations. And the more you use them, the more confident you'll feel when you speak. So, let's dive into some practical tips on how to do this.
Expanding your vocabulary is one of the most effective ways to move beyond the basics and sound more fluent. But how exactly do you go about it? First, it's important to understand that simply memorizing lists of words won't help you much in the long run. You need to learn words in context so you can actually use them in real conversations. One way to do this is by reading, whether it's books, news articles, or even blogs. Reading exposes you to new vocabulary in natural, real-world settings. It's like discovering new tools for your language toolbox.
That's right, David. Reading is an excellent way to learn new vocabulary. But don't just read for the sake of it. Pay attention to how the words are used in sentences and try to understand their meanings from the context. One of my favorite methods is to highlight or write down any new words I come across. Then later, I look them up to understand their meanings more deeply. Once you know what they mean, the next step is to use them in your conversations. And trust me, the more you use these words, the more natural they'll start to sound in your own speech.
That's a great tip, Sarah. And another way to expand your vocabulary is by listening to native speakers. Watch TV shows, movies, or podcasts in English, and listen carefully to the words and expressions people use. It's amazing how many new phrases you can pick up just by paying attention to the way native speakers talk. And this isn't just about learning new words, it's about learning how to use them in everyday conversation. Listening to these authentic conversations will teach you the rhythm, the flow, and the tone of how English is really spoken.
Absolutely, David. And remember, learning vocabulary is not about cramming as many words as possible into your head. It's about learning words that are useful to you in your life, words that you'll actually use in conversations. So, whether it's related to your job, your hobbies, or things you're passionate about, focus on learning vocabulary that fits your context. It's not just about knowing more words, it's about knowing the right words for the right situation.
So now that we've talked about how to expand your vocabulary, let's move on to something that can really help you sound more fluent. It's one thing to know new words, but it's another to actually use them in a way that sounds natural. One great way to do this is by replacing basic phrases with more sophisticated alternatives. This is a game changer when it comes to sounding more fluent.
Exactly, David. The goal is to move beyond those simple, repetitive phrases and start using expressions that sound more natural and fluent. And the best part is, you don't have to make big changes all at once. Little tweaks in your language can make a huge difference. For example, instead of always saying, "How are you?" you could say, "How's everything going?" or "How have you been?" These small changes will make you sound much more confident and natural when speaking.
Now that we've talked about how to expand your vocabulary, let's dive into a very important technique for sounding more fluent in English. It's not just about learning new words. It's about using those words in ways that make you sound more natural. A great way to do this is by replacing basic, repetitive phrases with more varied and sophisticated alternatives. You don't have to sound overly formal, but small adjustments in how you phrase things can really make a big difference in how fluent you appear.
That's so true, David. Take the phrase, "How are you?" for example. We all use it, but it's so basic and, honestly, a bit predictable. Instead of saying, "How are you?" all the time, try mixing it up with something like, "How's it going?" or "How have you been?" These alternatives sound much more natural and less scripted. It's the kind of language you hear native speakers use all the time, and it helps make your conversations sound more fluid and less robotic.
Exactly. And this doesn't just apply to greetings. Think about other phrases you use in daily conversations. For instance, instead of saying, "I don't know," you could say, "I'm not sure," or "I'm not certain about that." These alternatives make you sound more confident and fluent, even when you're unsure about something. The goal is to make your speech more dynamic and varied, and not to fall into the trap of using the same few phrases repeatedly.
That's a great example, David, and this works with so many common phrases. For instance, instead of saying, "I'm tired," you could say, "I'm exhausted," or "I'm wiped out." Instead of "I like it," you could say, "I'm a fan of it," or "I really enjoy it." The more you practice these variations, the more they will become second nature, and soon you'll be speaking more like a native. It's these small changes that add up and really improve the way you express yourself in English.
Now that we've talked about how to use more natural alternatives to basic phrases, let's explore another technique that can really boost your fluency. We're talking about using slang and idiomatic expressions. These are things that native speakers use all the time, but they might seem intimidating at first. But once you get the hang of them, they'll make you sound much more like a native English speaker.
Exactly, David. Slang and idioms are an important part of any language. They give your speech character and make it sound more authentic. You don't need to use them in every sentence, but when you do, it shows that you're familiar with the natural flow of the language. So, let's talk about some common idiomatic expressions that will help you sound more fluent and confident.
Now that we've covered how to expand your vocabulary and replace basic phrases with more natural alternatives, let's move on to something that can really take your English to the next level: slang and idiomatic expressions. These are the types of phrases that native speakers use all the time, but they can be tricky for learners at first. The good news is that once you start using them, your English will sound much more fluent and natural.
That's right, David. Slang and idioms are a huge part of how native speakers communicate. These expressions often don't translate directly, but they help to make conversations sound more relaxed and authentic. For example, instead of saying "I'm very tired," you might hear a native speaker say, "I'm beat," or "I'm wiped out." It's a much more casual and natural way of saying the same thing.
Exactly. And the great thing about slang and idioms is that they're used in everyday situations. It's not about being formal or sounding proper. It's about speaking like a real person in the way people actually communicate. Take the phrase, "it's a piece of cake." If someone says that, they're not talking about dessert. They're saying something is really easy. If you use this expression, you'll sound much more natural than just saying, "it's easy."
Absolutely, David. And the best way to learn these expressions is to listen to native speakers and pay attention to the way they use them in context. Watch movies, listen to podcasts, or engage in conversations with English speakers. The more you expose yourself to these expressions, the more comfortable you'll become with using them. And once you start incorporating them into your own speech, you'll notice how much more fluent you sound. Don't be afraid to experiment with new expressions. You'll sound much more confident when you do.
Well said, Sarah. And as we wrap up today's episode, remember that learning slang and idioms isn't just about sounding cool or trendy. It's about sounding more like a native speaker, making your conversations feel more genuine and less robotic. So, don't be afraid to step outside the basics and experiment with these phrases.
Exactly, David. And remember, it's all about practice. The more you use these tips, expanding your vocabulary, replacing basic phrases, and incorporating slang and idioms, the more fluent and confident you'll sound. So keep practicing, and you'll definitely notice an improvement in your English. If you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and share this episode with your friends who are also learning English. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the next episode.